The Valley of the Kings, 1914. The air here does not merely shimmer, it assaults. It is a landscape of limestone and despair, a place where the sun beats down with such ferocity that the rocks themselves seem to groan under the heat. For decades, this desolate gorge on the west bank of the Nile had been the playground of Western aristocrats and the obsession of archaeologists. They came looking for gold, for history, and for immortality. Most found only dust. By the eve of the Great War, the consensus among the world's leading Egyptologists was absolute. The valley was empty. The great American lawyer and amateur archaeologist Theodore Davis, who had held the concession to dig in the valley from 1902 to 1913, had turned over every likely stone. He had found minor tombs, empty pits, and fragments, but the great prize eluded him. In 1914, weary and disillusioned, Davis famously declared the epitaph of the excavation era, "I fear the Valley of the Tombs is now exhausted." The world believed him. The museums of Europe believed him. But one man, a solitary and often difficult figure named Howard Carter, did not. Howard Carter was not a typical hero of a boy's adventure novel. Born on May 9, 1874 in Kensington, London, he was the youngest of 11 children. He was a sickly child, prone to illness, sent away from the smog of London to live with his aunts in Norfolk. He received no formal schooling, a fact that would leave him with a lifelong chip on his shoulder regarding the academic elite. Instead of universities, his classroom was his father's studio. Samuel Carter was a renowned animal artist, and he taught his son to look, really look at the world. He taught him the discipline of the hand and the eye, how to capture detail with photographic precision. It was this artistic talent that brought a 17-year-old Carter to Egypt in 1891 as a copyist for Percy Newberry. He wasn't there to dig, he was there to paint. But the sand gets into the blood. Working alongside legends like Flinders Petrie, Carter transformed from an artist into a methodical scientist. He learned that archaeology was not about smashing doors for treasure, but about preservation and patience. By 1922, however, patience was running out. Carter had partnered with the wealthy George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, in 1907. Lord Carnarvon, an aristocrat with a fragile constitution and a passion for fast cars and ancient history, had funded Carter's search for a tomb that everyone said didn't exist, the tomb of a minor, forgotten boy king named Tutankhamun. For 5 long years, Carter had scoured the valley. He had moved mountains of rubble, enduring the heat and the ridicule of his peers. They found nothing. The 1921 season had been a disaster. The money was gone. In the summer of 1922, Carnarvon summoned Carter to his ancestral home, Highclere Castle, to deliver the fatal news. The funding was cut. The dream was over. In a moment of desperate conviction, Carter pleaded with the Earl. He took a gamble that few men would dare. He offered to pay for the excavation himself, a bluff for he had little money, if Carnarvon would just hold the concession for 1 more year. 1 last season, Carter begged. Moved by his friend's intensity, Carnarvon relented. He agreed to fund 1 final attempt. Carter returned to Luxor in late October 1922, carrying the weight of a final chance. He brought with him a yellow canary, a bright spot of color in a monochrome world. His workers, superstitious and hopeful, saw the bird as an omen. "The golden bird," they whispered, "it will lead us to the gold." November 1st, 1922. Carter ordered his men to clear a triangle of ground in front of the tomb of Ramesses VI. It was an unpromising spot, covered in the debris of ancient workmen's huts. It was methodical, unglamorous work. The dust was choking. 3 days passed in the usual rhythm of excavation. The scrape of the hoe, the baskets of sand, the relentless sun. Then came Saturday, November 4. The morning broke with the usual stillness of the desert. The work began shortly after sunrise. Around 10 a.m., a strange silence fell over a section of the dig site. A young water boy, some accounts name him as a local fella, others simply as a worker clearing sand, had struck something hard. It wasn't the jagged edge of a natural rock. It was smooth. It was cut. Carter was summoned. He brushed away the sand with his hands, his heart likely hammering against his ribs. There, beneath the debris of the 20th dynasty, hewn into the bedrock, was a step. A single stone step. The workmen, sensing the shift in atmosphere, began to dig with renewed fury. Carter stopped them. He needed discipline. Slowly, carefully, they cleared the sand. A second step appeared, then a third. By the afternoon, the top of a sunken staircase was visible, plunging steeply into the earth. It was the kind of discovery that keeps archaeologists awake at night. Was it a tomb? Was it a cache? Or was it, like so many finds before, an unfinished pit abandoned 3,000 years ago? Carter's mind raced. The location was right, directly beneath the entrance to Ramesses VI. The reason it hadn't been found was simple. The workmen building Ramesses' tomb had dumped their rubble right on top of this entrance, unknowingly sealing it for eternity. By sunset on November 5th, 12 steps were exposed, and there, standing before them, was a blocked doorway. It was plastered and sealed. Carter fell to his knees to examine the impressions in the clay. He saw the seal of the royal necropolis, the jackal god Anubis crouching over 9 bound captives, the symbol of the valley's guardians. But there was a problem. In his excitement, he could not find the specific name of the king. The seals told him it was a royal burial, or at least a high-ranking official, but the name was missing. Had he found a cache of mummies, or was it him? The temptation to break the door down right then must have been agonizing. He was alone, thousands of miles from his sponsor, staring at the culmination of a lifetime's work. But Howard Carter was a man of discipline. He knew that this discovery belonged as much to Carnarvon as it did to him. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, he ordered his men to do the unthinkable. Fill it back in. They covered the door, buried the steps, and rolled great stones over the spot to hide it from thieves and rival archaeologists. That night, the telegraph wires from Luxor to England hummed with a message that would become legendary. Carter wrote, "At last have made wonderful discovery in valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact, recovered same for your arrival. Congratulate you." The silence of the valley returned, but the world had changed. For nearly 3 weeks, Carter sat on the greatest secret in history. He guarded the spot like a sentinel. His workers, now buzzing with rumors of gold, watched him closely. Far away, in England, the telegram arrived at Highclere Castle. Lord Carnarvon, 56 years old and in failing health, felt the adrenaline that only Egypt could provide. He immediately packed his trunks, taking with him his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, his constant companion and a woman of adventurous spirit. They boarded a ship, then a train, racing toward Luxor. They arrived on November 22, 1922. The reunion was electric. Carter met them, likely looking exhausted but burning with a strange energy. He led them back to the site. The workmen were ordered to clear the stairs once more. As the rubble was removed for the second time, Carter noticed something he had missed in his initial frenzy. On the lower part of the sealed door, now fully exposed, there were other seals. He leaned in, squinting in the harsh light. There, unmistakable in the plaster, was the cartouche. The basket, the beetle, the sun disk. Neb Keperuwe, Tutankhamun. It was the confirmation they had prayed for, but alongside the euphoria came a chill of doubt. Carter, with his sharp artist's eye, noticed something troubling. The top left corner of the doorway showed signs of having been breached and resealed in antiquity. The plaster didn't quite match. The realization was sickening. They were not the first. Ancient tomb robbers had been here. Had they stripped it clean? Carnarvon asked, voicing the fear that hung in the air. "We can only hope," Carter replied. "The robbers broke in, yes, but the fact that the priests resealed it suggests there was something left to protect." The tension at the camp was palpable. To make matters worse, the local workers began to whisper about omens. The golden bird, Carter's lucky canary, had met a grim fate. On the very day the tomb was opened, a cobra, the symbol of the pharaoh's power, the uraeus that spits fire at the enemies of the king, had slithered into Carter's house and eaten the canary. "The pharaoh is angry," the workers muttered. "He has killed the bird that led us here. He will kill those who enter." Carter dismissed the superstitions with a wave of his hand. He was a man of science, not ghosts. But as they stood before the sealed door on the afternoon of November 26, preparing to breach the barrier of 3 millennia, even the most rational mind might have felt the weight of the centuries pressing down. The air was thick with dust and destiny. The door stood before them. Behind it lay darkness, and inside that darkness, history was holding its breath. The corridor behind the first door was filled with rubble, stone chips, and dust, a deliberate barrier placed by the ancient priests to thwart thieves. It took days of back-breaking labor to clear it. As the baskets of limestone chips were hauled away, the anticipation in the air grew heavy, almost suffocating. By the afternoon of November 26th, the workers had cleared the final few feet. They found themselves standing before a second sealed doorway. This one was also stamped with the seals of Tutankhamun and the royal necropolis. But unlike the first, it appeared untouched at the bottom. It was around 4 p.m. The sun was beginning to dip behind the western cliffs, casting long, violet shadows across the valley. The team gathered in the small space at the bottom of the stairs. Howard Carter, Lord Carnarvon, Lady Evelyn, and Carter's assistant, Arthur Callender. The Egyptian workers stood back, silent witnesses to history. Carter stepped forward. His hands, usually steady with the drafting pencil, were trembling. He picked up an iron rod. With a deep breath, he drove the point into the upper left-hand corner of the plaster blocking. It gave way. Behind the plaster was not rock, but emptiness. He widened the hole slightly. Then he struck a match and lit a candle. What happened next is perhaps the most analyzed moment in archaeological history. Carter inserted the candle into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing. The hot air escaping from the chamber after being trapped for 3,300 years caused the candle flame to flicker violently. Carter stood frozen, his face pressed against the jagged opening, his eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. Time seemed to suspend. For those standing behind him, the silence was agonizing. Lord Carnarvon, unable to bear the tension any longer, tugged at Carter's jacket. "Can you see anything?" he demanded, his voice tight. Carter turned slowly. The candlelight caught the moisture in his eyes. He spoke 3 words that would echo through the century. "Yes, wonderful things."
He did not just see a room, he saw a hallucination of wealth. As the flames stabilized, the darkness dissolved to reveal a chaotic, shimmering wonderland. The details of the room emerged slowly from the mist, Carter later wrote in his diary. Strange animals, statues, and gold. Everywhere the glint of gold. The party widened the hole and squeezed inside. They found themselves in what would later be called the antechamber. It was a room of organized chaos, packed to the ceiling with goods. There were 3 great funerary beds, their sides carved in the form of strange beasts, lions, cows, and hippopotamuses with long gilded teeth. There were dismantled chariots, piled like firewood, but glistening with gold leaf. There were alabaster vases of exquisite translucency, inlaid boxes and stools. To the left of the doorway, a pile of white oval boxes contained trussed ducks and cuts of meat, food for the pharaoh's journey. To the right, 2 life-size statues of the king, black-skinned and wearing skirts of gold, stood like sentinels guarding a sealed partition in the northern wall. They held maces and staffs, their foreheads adorned with the royal cobra. The air in the room was still, dead, and dry. But it was the sense of presence that overwhelmed them. Carter noted that the room felt as if the funeral procession had just left. A clay lamp lay on the floor, the soot from its wick still fresh. A fingerprint left by a priest on a freshly painted surface 3 millennia ago was still visible. The gap between the ancient past and the present had vanished. That night, exhausted but too wired to sleep, Carter and Carnarvon did something that they would keep secret for years. They noticed a small hole in the sealed door guarded by the 2 statues, a hole made by ancient robbers and hastily patched. It was just wide enough for a slender person. They squeezed through. They found themselves in the burial chamber. A massive wall of gold, a shrine, filled the room almost entirely. They did not open it. They squeezed back out, resealed the hole with camouflage, and returned to the surface. They knew the king was there. They had looked into the face of eternity, and it was waiting for them.
For the next few months, the excavation transformed from a treasure hunt into a forensic operation. The world demanded to see the king, but Carter refused to be rushed. He knew that to move a single object without recording its position would be a crime against science. The antechamber contained nearly 700 items. The variety was staggering. It was a snapshot of royal life in the 18th dynasty. Among the pile of chariots, 6 in total, dismantled to fit into the narrow space, Carter found a golden throne that is widely considered one of the most beautiful works of art ever discovered. Covered in gold sheet, silver, and gems, the back panel depicted an intimate domestic scene, young Tutankhamun relaxing on a chair while his wife, Ankhesenamun, gently rubs perfumed oil onto his shoulder. It was a human moment, frozen in precious metal. Then there were the oddities. Tucked away among the priceless treasures was a simple wooden mannequin, a torso used by the royal tailors to fit the pharaoh's clothes without bothering the king himself. It was a stark reminder that this god-king was also a teenage boy who grew, changed sizes, and needed new shirts. There were weapons, too. Bows, arrows, shields, and daggers. One dagger, found later on the mummy but hinted at by the weaponry in the antechamber, would baffle scientists for decades. Its blade was made of iron that had not rusted. In 2016, modern technology would confirm what Carter could only suspect. The iron was of meteoric origin. The boy king was buried with a weapon forged from a fallen star. Everywhere they looked, they saw the duality of the find. It was majestic, yet hasty. The tomb was small, the plaster in the burial chamber was unfinished in patches, and objects were crammed together. Tutankhamun had died unexpectedly, likely before his true royal tomb was ready.
He was buried in a borrowed room, packed with borrowed furniture, yet the sheer volume of gold was enough to bankrupt a modern nation.
By January 1923, the Valley of the Kings was no longer a lonely place. It was a circus. Tourists flocked to Luxor, camping out near the dig site, hoping for a glimpse of a gold chair or an alabaster vase being carried out. But the real siege came from the press. Journalists from every major newspaper in London, New York, and Paris descended on the Winter Palace Hotel. They hounded Carter, they bribed his workers, they invented stories when they couldn't get facts. Carter, a man who preferred the silence of the desert, was driven to the brink of a nervous breakdown. "I am dead beat," he wrote. "I am sick to death of reporters." Lord Carnarvon, seeing the chaos and needing to recoup the massive cost of the excavation, made a decision that would change the way the world consumed the story. On January 9, 1923, he signed an exclusive contract with the Times of London. For £5,000 up front and a 75% cut of syndication fees, the Times got everything. Every photo, every update, every detail went to them first. It was a public relations disaster. The rest of the world's press was furious. Denied access to the facts, they turned to fiction. If they couldn't write about the science, they would write about the mystery. They began to interview mystics, spiritualists, and novelists. They began to look for a dark side to the discovery. They found their hook in the inscriptions. While no curse was ever actually written over the door, a complete fabrication by the media, reporters latched on to a few obscure texts found on magical bricks and statues. They quoted a line from a clay seal, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." This inscription, famously cited, was never actually found on a seal in the tomb. It was likely a conflation of different texts. But the seed was planted. The world didn't just want gold anymore. It wanted a ghost story. Despite the media storm, the work continued. On February 16, 1923, the official opening of the burial chamber took place. It was a solemn affair. Dignitaries and Egyptian officials crowded into the hot, airless antechamber. Carter chiseled away the blocking of the northern door. When the stones were removed, a collective gasp filled the room. They were not looking at a sarcophagus. They were looking at a wall of gold. It was the side of the outermost gilded shrine. It was immense, roughly 17 feet long, 11 feet wide, and 9 feet high. It filled the burial chamber so completely that there was less than 2 feet of space between the shrine and the rock walls. Carter had to squeeze sideways to move around it. He opened the doors of the great shrine. Inside, he saw a second set of doors, sealed with ropes and a clay seal. The seal was intact. The robbers had entered the outer shrine, but had stopped there. The king was safe. For Lord Carnarvon, this was the pinnacle of his life. He had vindicated his faith in Carter. He had stood in the presence of a pharaoh. But he would not live to see the face of the king. In late February, shortly after the opening, a small tragedy occurred that would become the foundation of a modern myth. Carter's canary, the golden bird, was indeed eaten by a cobra. The workers were terrified. "This is the beginning," they said. Then on March 6, 1923, Lord Carnarvon was in Cairo. While shaving, he accidentally nicked a mosquito bite on his cheek with his razor. It seemed like nothing, a trivial cut, but the wound did not heal. Bacteria, streptococcus, entered the bloodstream. Erysipelas set in. The infection spread rapidly, turning into blood poisoning and finally pneumonia. For weeks, the Earl fought for his life in the Continental Savoy Hotel. He was delirious, burning with fever.
On April 5, 1923, at around 1:55 a.m., George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, died. At that precise moment, two things happened, or so the story goes. First, according to reports, all the lights in Cairo flickered and went out. The city was plunged into darkness. Engineers later explained that the Cairo power grid was notoriously unreliable, but the timing was impeccable. Second, back at Highclere Castle in England, Carnarvon's favorite dog, a terrier named Susie, allegedly sat up, howled into the night, and dropped dead. The newspapers went wild. The curse of the pharaoh was no longer a rumor, it was a headline. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes and a fervent spiritualist, announced to the press that an elemental spirit guarding the tomb had likely caused the Earl's death. Marie Corelli, a melodramatic novelist, claimed she had warned Carnarvon that the most dire punishment follows any rash intruder into a sealed tomb. The public devoured it. Every subsequent death of anyone remotely connected to the tomb, a radiologist, a visitor, a secretary, was tallied by the press as another victim of the mummy's curse. Howard Carter, a man of logic, was furious. He called the curse theory Tommy rot. He pointed out that if anyone should be cursed, it was him. He was the one who broke the seals, entered the sanctuary, and handled the objects. Yet, he felt fine. But Carter was now alone. His patron was dead. The politics of the excavation were becoming toxic. The Egyptian government, asserting its independence from British colonial oversight, began to restrict Carter's access. The happy days of discovery were over. The curse might not have been supernatural, but a dark cloud had certainly descended over the tomb of Tutankhamun. With Lord Carnarvon gone and the world watching, Carter returned to the tomb with a heavy heart, but a singular focus. The media circus had not abated, but inside the burial chamber, the atmosphere was one of claustrophobic engineering. The task before him was staggering. He had to dismantle the massive golden shrines that filled the room like a ship in a bottle. There were 4 of them. 4 great gilded boxes, nested one inside the other like Russian matryoshka dolls, shielding the king from the world. The work was agonizingly slow. The space between the outer shrine and the chamber walls was often less than 2 feet. Carter and his team worked in intense heat, their clothes soaked in sweat, manipulating heavy sections of gilded wood that had not moved in 30 centuries. One slip of a pulley, one stumble, and a priceless artifact would be crushed. It took 84 days just to dismantle the shrines. As they removed each layer, the anticipation grew. Inside the first shrine was a second, draped in a pall of linen decorated with golden daisies. Inside the second was a third. Inside the third was a fourth. And inside the fourth lay the sarcophagus. It was a masterpiece of stone, carved from a single block of yellow quartzite. At the corners, 4 goddesses, Isis, Nephthys, Neith, and Selkut, spread their wings in a protective embrace, guarding the body within. But even here, the story of the tomb's hasty construction whispered to them. The lid of the sarcophagus was made of red granite, not quartzite. It had been painted yellow to match the box, and cracked through the middle, then daubed with gypsum cement. It was a mismatch, a spare part used in an emergency. On January 3, 1924, Carter was ready to lift the lid. Using a complex system of pulleys, the granite slab, weighing over a ton, rose slowly into the air. Inside, covered in linen shrouds, lay the first coffin.
It was anthropoid, human-shaped, made of cypress wood overlaid with gold foil. It was magnificent, glowing in the electric light, but what caught Carter's eye was a small, heartbreaking detail. Resting on the forehead of the coffin, dried and brittle but still recognizable, was a small wreath of olive leaves and cornflowers. It was a farewell gift, likely placed there by the young widow, Tutankhamun. Among all that regal splendor, there was nothing so beautiful as those few withered flowers. Just as the team was on the verge of the final revelation, politics intervened. The friction between Carter and the Egyptian Service of Antiquities had reached a boiling point. The government, asserting its national rights, demanded more control over the excavation and canceled the ladies' visit permits for the wives of the excavators. Carter, a man of short temper and fierce principle, snapped. On February 12, 1924, he did something unthinkable. He went on strike. He locked the tomb, posted a notice of protest, and walked away. For nearly a year, the tomb sat silent, the coffin hung suspended, the work stopped. It was a standoff between an obstinate Englishman and a proud nation reclaiming its heritage. Only in January 1925, after a change in the Egyptian government and a renegotiation of the concession, which stripped the Carnarvon estate of the right to a share of the fines, did Carter return. He had lost the battle for ownership, but he had won the right to finish his work.
The final act of the drama began in the autumn of 1925. The team lifted the lid of the first coffin. Inside, they found a second coffin, even more elaborate than the first, inlaid with colored glass and semi-precious stones. Then, on October 24, 1925, they lifted the lid of the second coffin. A collective gasp went through the room. The third coffin was not made of wood. It was heavy, impossibly heavy. It was made of solid gold. This innermost coffin was a masterpiece of the goldsmith's art. Measuring 6 feet in length and beaten from heavy gold sheet ranging from 2.5 to 3 millimeters thick, it weighed 110.4 kilograms, 243.4 pounds. Its value, even just as scrap metal, was astronomical. As an artifact, it was priceless. But the true face of the king was still hidden. On October 28, 1925, Carter prepared to reveal the mummy itself. The golden coffin was tight-fitting, and the mummy was stuck fast to the bottom by gallons of black resinous unguents that had been poured over it during the funeral rites. The oils had hardened into a rock-like mass, carbonizing the linen wrappings. With extreme care, the gold lid was raised. There, wrapped in bandages that were charred and brittle, lay the body of Tutankhamun. And covering his head and shoulders was the object that would become the icon of the ancient world, the gold mask. It stared back at them with a gaze of serene, terrifying beauty. Beaten from 2 sheets of high-purity gold, it weighed 22.5 pounds, or 10.23 kilograms. The face was idealized but distinctive. A youth with full lips and wide eyes, outlined in lapis lazuli. On his brow sat the vulture and the cobra, the gods of Upper and Lower Egypt, side by side. The stripes of the Nemus headcloth were inlaid with blue glass. Carter looked into the eyes of the boy whose name he had whispered for a decade. The mask, he noted, is a magnificent specimen of ancient art. The face is a portrait. It was the climax of the discovery. The long journey from the first step in the sand to this moment of gold and silence was complete. They had found him.
In November 1925, the scientific examination of the mummy began. It was a destructive process. Because the resins had glued the body to the coffin, Carter and his anatomist, Dr. Douglas Derry, were forced to dismember the mummy to extract it. They cut the body into pieces to remove it from the gold shell, a decision that modern archaeologists view with horror, but which Carter felt was the only option to save the artifacts from thieves who would surely rip the body apart for the gold. The autopsy revealed a frail young man. He was about 5 feet 6 inches tall, 1.67 meters. He had a slight build. He was roughly 19 years old when he died. But what killed him, the body offered clues, but no definitive answer. There was a fracture in his leg, likely from a fall, perhaps from a chariot crash. Had it become infected? Had he died of gangrene? Later DNA studies in 2010 would reveal he suffered from severe malaria and had a club foot, requiring him to walk with a cane. Over 130 walking sticks were found in the tomb. He was not a mighty warrior, as his propaganda statue suggested. He was a disabled teenager, the product of incest. His parents were brother and sister, struggling to rule an empire. The fragility of his body made the splendor of his tomb all the more poignant.
The clearing of the tomb took another 7 years. Carter cataloged every bead, every shapti, every scrap of linen. The last artifacts were not sent to the Cairo Museum until February 1932. Howard Carter lived for another 17 years after the discovery. He never found another tomb. He never married. He lived a solitary life, dividing his time between Luxor and London, dealing artifacts on the side, a controversial fact that has only recently come to light, and fighting with authorities. He died on March 2, 1939, in London, of lymphoma. He was 64 years old. The curse did not get him. If anything, the curse was the fame itself. He had achieved the greatest success in the history of his field, yet he died lonely and somewhat embittered, feeling that his scientific work was overshadowed by the gold and the media circus. On his gravestone in Putney Vale Cemetery, the inscription reads, a quote taken from the beautiful lotus chalice found in the tomb, the very words the ancient Egyptians wished for their king. May your spirit live. May you spend millions of years, you who love Thebes, sitting with your face to the north wind, your eyes beholding happiness. A century later, the discovery of Tutankhamun remains the benchmark against which all other finds are measured. It was not just a collection of objects. It was a time machine. Before 1922, Tutankhamun was a footnote, a name erased from history by his successors. Today, he is the most famous pharaoh who ever lived. His face, the golden mask, is the face of Egypt. The treasure did not bring back the dead, but it granted Tutankhamun the one thing every ancient Egyptian craved above all else, for his name to be spoken. As long as we speak his name, he lives. Howard Carter's persistence taught us that history is never truly lost. It is only waiting. Waiting under the sand. Waiting for the right person with the right amount of stubbornness to dig in the right place. The first step, found on November 4th, 1922, led down into the dark. But what came out of that darkness was a light that has never gone out. Wonderful things, indeed.